Okay, we finished up chapter 31 last week, and we're going to try to move through the rest of Numbers tonight, if that's possible. I think it really is, because a lot of this does not require us to sit and break this down verse by verse, and certainly not in word studies. So I would really like to try to conclude it tonight, but if we don't, then that's okay too. So as we begin, I want you to look with me, if you will, in your Bibles at Numbers 32. I have a little subtitle in my Bible. It says Transjordan Tribes. Transjordan Tribes. And I don't know exactly why they call it Transjordan, because these two tribes that we're going to be talking about did not across the Jordan, not to settle there anyway. So it begins in chapter 32, and I'll read into it just a little bit. It says, the Reubenites and the Gadites, who were had very large herds and flocks, saw that the lands of Jazer and Gilead were suitable for livestock. So they came to Moses and Eleazar, the priest, and to the leaders of the community and said, and I don't want to read all these names. Do I have to? Ataroth, Dibon, Jazer, Nimrod, okay, all those guys came to them, and the land that the Lord subdued before the people of Israel, and said, they are suitable for livestock, and your servants have livestock. So if we found favor in your eyes, they said, let this land be given to your servants as our possession. Do not make us cross the Jordan. Well, if you remember, the idea here was that the 12 tribes of Israel would cross the Jordan into the promised land, subdue it, and then divide it up between the 12 tribes. But ultimately, before they even crossed the Jordan to get into the promised land, the Reubenites and the Gadites and their cousin termites, no cousins, just the Reubenites and the Gadites, they were herdsmen, they had flocks, they had herds of who knows what. Herds and flocks is all we know. So we know they got sheep, goats, who knows what else. And the land on the east side of the Jordan was excellent for that kind of business and raising of animals. So they went to Moses and they said, look, I know what the plan is. We're supposed to go across, but could we find favor in your eyes and stay on this side of the Jordan? Well, if you think about this, at first sight, it's kind of like, hey, we really like where we're at. It's got good grazed land. The pastures are great. Everything's good for us right here. We're all here anyway. We would just like to stay here. Well, the first thing that comes to mind is, well, wait a minute. All the 12 tribes were supposed to cross in there and conquer the land, the promised land, and drive the inhabitants out. So one might initially say, well, it looks like these two tribes are trying to cop out of all the fighting, but that's really not the case. Their focus was on raising their families and their herds and their livestock, and they just saw it was such good promised land that they would really like to stay there. So Moses immediately came at them. If you want to read verses 6 through 15 to yourself real quick, I'll just kind of give you the explanation. And he said, look, he says, are you guys being arrogant, or are you being stubborn and rebellious like your fathers were who died in the desert, and you don't want to go in there and fight the land when God told us to go take the land? I'm summarizing, obviously. And they said, no, we just like this land. And so Moses talked with the Lord, and to make it a little short, what happened was he said, okay, here's the deal. Moses presents this option to them. He says, you can stay, you can live and settle on the east side of the Jordan if and only if you and your fighting men will cross the Jordan with everybody else and help us take the land, and literally stay there until we take the land. And then at that time, whenever that is, you can come back across the Jordan to your families and all that, and you will settle there. So that sounded like a pretty good deal to them. They did not get out of the fighting. They had to participate just like all the fighting men of Israel. And yet they had in the back of their mind, we've got our land. We know where it is. So that's a real great motivator to really get this conquering of the promised land over with as soon as they could, because they knew they would be going back to their homeland. Does anybody remember how long it took for the Israelites and Joshua to conquer the promised land?
400 and some odd years.
Pardon?
Wasn't it 400 some years?
No, that was the wandering in the desert thing, sort of.
No, that was 40.
It was about 70 years it took them to really get settled into the promised land, to conquer their enemies. And you know, they did part of it real quick, and then they took another part, and then it was years maybe they took another part, but it took about 70 years. So this is a long time. You're talking nearly, in our thinking, about a generation of fighting men to conquer that land. So when I was reading this and studying it, the question came to my mind, did some of these guys, first of all, obviously there were some who were killed in battle. Not many, but some. So they didn't go home. And then you had some more who continued in the campaign to take the land year after year, decade after decade. And they may have had, they may have taken a 10-day leave or something and gone home for a while and had to come back. We don't know anything about that. But that's probable that it might have happened like that from time to time in between different campaigns. But ultimately, we got some men who left their families on the east side of the Jordan and went to the west side to fight with the other Israelites and take the land, who probably, as far as living there, they never went back to the east side to live there. So that's interesting that they literally gave up their families and all to go to instill or to ensure that their families would have this land. And they went across to the west side and got in the campaign to subdue the promised land. Okay, yeah, Don, please jump in there.
Stan, it's not evident here, but we know from later scriptures that it was also half of Manasseh stayed on the eastern side. So it wasn't just the 2 tribes, there's 2.5 tribes.
Yes, that is correct. Actually, let's see, some of the notes that I put here, this particular chapter is about the settling of Reuben and Gad and Gilead, the land east of the Jordan. And this is mentioned throughout the rest of the Bible, as a matter of fact. The agreement that Moses makes with the people of Reuben and Gad is that the tribes would gain the land of Gilead through their inheritance, since it was good land for the livestock. But as I said, they would be required to go into the west side and fight with the rest of Israel. We learn here that in the land of Gilead is the land that formerly belonged to the king of the Amorites and Og, the king of Bashan, in Numbers 32, verse 33. These 2 kings are later mentioned by name twice in the Psalms as kings who God struck them down. Now, it's interesting that these 2 guys would be mentioned in the Psalms. And what about all the other kings that God struck down? What about all the other kings that were defeated going into the promised land? And that question arose to one commentator, and he answered it and said that the psalmist uses these kings as a representation of the victories over all the kings of the promised land. And evidently they represent the first fruits of the promised land. In literature, this is called synecdoche. I think I said that right. I looked it up in Webster and had them say it for me, and then I wrote it out the way it sounds, and I still can't say it. But anyway, that particular type of literature is where you take a part of something and you represent it as the whole. So they were just naming a couple of kings and representing it as all of the kings that were conquered at that time. And I think we're going to talk some more later about Manasseh and the 2.5 tribes that are on the east side later. Yes, Susan, you got a question?
when I was studying this, I read that it says 2 1/2 tribes never took possession of the land in west of the Jordan River.
Yes,
Is that true?
2.5 tribes. It was the tribe of Reuben, tribe of Reuben, tribe of Gad, and half a tribe of Manasseh. 2.5 tribes. Yeah.
Verse 30 does mention the half tribe.
What now, Marilyn?
33 does mention the half tribe of Manasseh.
Okay, good. We're getting into chapter 33 now.
Verse,
Somebody else?
verse 33 of chapter 32.
Oh, verse 33 of 32. Let me see. 33 of 32. Where did 33 go? Oh, I got it under here. I did all of these chapters, read through them and printed them out again today, and I'm looking for that verse. We will before the Lord. Did you say verse 32?
33.
33.
Moses gave the Gad of Reuben and the half tribe of Manasseh. Thank you. Okay. So now we've got it in that chapter. I was thinking it was later. Good. Don, thanks for bringing that out. How come you guys keep switching places on my screen? How do you do that? Okay, chapter 33. Chapter 33 gives us the whole story of God's covenant with his people. It's recounting every event from the day of their redemption coming out of Egypt until they got to the promised land. So obviously we're not going to read through all of this, but if you look at the beginning verses, it says, here are the stages in the journey of the Israelites when they came out of Egypt by divisions under the leadership of Moses and Aaron. And at the Lord's command, Moses recorded the stages in their journey. This is their journey by stages. And then, wow, there we go. If you're looking at your Bible, you can see what a long list. They went from here and then they stopped there for the night. And then later, a week later, you find them stopping at the edge of a river. And then later they were at Motel 6. And then they moved on from there. Every step, every place they stopped is chronicled here by Moses. So verses 5 through 37 give us those steps and where they went. And verse 38 through 40, would someone read those for us? (38 through 40).
Oh, you mean out loud?
I got it.
Okay.
It's 33, 38 through 40.
Yes. No, 38 through 40. Yeah, I'm sorry.
At the Lord's command, Aaron the priest went up Mount Hor, where he died on the first day of the 5th month of the 40th year after the Israelites came out of Egypt. Aaron was 123 years old when he died on Mount Hor.
Okay, and 40?
The Canaanite king of Arad, who lived in the Negev of Canaan, heard that the Israelites were coming.
Okay, and then it chronicles a step-by-step of them coming to that part. And so we get that 41 through 48, where they're on the plains of Moab and they encamped along the Jordan from Beth Jezimoth to Abel Shittim. So we got them traveling this far. Do you guys remember when I showed you the original, what's the title of that drawing? It draws out the plan. I can't even remember the name of the drawing now. Anybody help me out? Let's see. I'm looking up on my bookshelf. I got a giant one. Anyway, it's Illustrated Books of the Bible. And you remember us showing the book of Numbers and how it showed them coming across and they went to the plain of Moab. So that's where they ended up here before they go into the promised land. Does anybody remember me showing that little video? Okay, I see a couple nods. Good deal. All right. So then it goes on in verse 50, on the plains of Moab by the Jordan across from Jericho. So everybody, can you picture Jericho on your map? Normally we see Israel coming across from west to east, going into Jericho, and they're going to be taking Jericho, obviously, to that area. Well, they're in that area. They've already taken Jericho, didn't they? Or am I in a different book? Help me out here with my.
No, not yet.
Not yet.
You're in a different book.
Different book. It's in Joshua, right? Isn't that in Joshua? Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. Yeah, it's in Joshua where they take Jericho. So Jericho is still a fortified city at this point. But I want you to notice in verse 51, he says here, speak to the Israelites and say to them, this is command of Moses to talk to the people. When you cross the Jordan into Canaan, drive out the inhabitants of the land before you. That's step one. Step two is, I lost it. When you cross the Jordan, drive them out and destroy all their carved images, their cast idols, and demolish all their high places. Well, when the bottom line in here is that God is saying, go in and drive out the inhabitants of the land and literally take the land away from them. And hopefully, you know how you have in wartime, we see this in Syria and we see it in the Middle East a lot. In fact, recently they were coming out of the hot Arab areas and flooding into Greece as refugees. And this is the idea that we get here. The God is telling Moses to tell them to drive them out. So they would be forced out of their area and they would be refugees into another area someplace. Doesn't tell us where they went. But a lot of them would be killed in the battle of doing that. And a lot then would be refugees. So what about, we know what it means to break down or tear down carved idols. And we know what it means to tear down cast idols, those that have been poured out of metal. What about demolishing the high places? What is that referring to?
Well, usually they set up a place for worship. There would be a place they would set it up higher so that other,
Okay,
and it would be set aside.
time out. You're breaking up real bad. Try it again. Look. Can you get closer to your microphone?
How about now?
Well, okay.
Usually when they place for an idol set aside, it would be.
Hey, Brian, hey, wait a minute. I know what the problem is. You and Dawn are in the same room on different devices, right?
Yeah,
That's why we can't hear you.
feedback.
It's echo. Hey, Dawn, mute your microphone. And we should be able to hear Brian then. All right, good. Now, Brian, try it again.
All right. Usually what would happen is they would set up a place that was prominent for the worship of whatever idol that they had set up. So he's telling them to take that whole area down.
Okay. And a lot of times we're talking about, usually they try to put something like this on a mound. But whatever it is, even if it's not on a mound, they build up altars for sacrifices. And that's what he's saying. Don't just tear down the idols, tear down the places where they actually offer sacrifices to false gods. Okay, good. Look at verse 55. This is interesting. But if you do not drive out the inhabitants, he's saying, the inhabitants of the land, those you allow to remain will become barbs in your eyes and thorns in your sides. They will give you trouble in the land where you will live, and then I will do to you what I plan to do to them. Wow, help me out here. Who's got some insight into that part?
It's pretty simple. The Israelites had a history of parlaying themselves with foreign women, And what happens is that they get involved with them, and then the next thing you know, they're worshiping idols again, and they've left Yahweh God behind again.
Okay, so we've seen this happen over and over, haven't we? This is nothing new, and God knows. The Lord knows that if they go in there and they start intermarrying with the women in the inhabitants of the land, that ultimately they're going to be led astray. Now, you would think that a religious people like Israel, who has seen all that God has done for them, wouldn't you think that they would say, man, we're not going with foreign gods. We got the one true God. Why would they even consider going and worshiping other gods?
A happy wife makes a happy life.
Thank you for that deep theological yeah. All right. So what would happen?
No, wait a minute. It's true.
It is true.
I apologize there, but it's true. What happens is that these guys get these women and they beat them on the head until finally they say, okay, put up your whatever it is, and I'll let you do it. Next thing you know, they're side by side.
Okay. One of the things that we don't often consider is the fact that these pagan worshipers really believed that the false god that they were worshiping really was active in their lives, especially in agriculture, because they're all agricultural societies at this time. But they really believed that when they prayed to Moab, that he was the god who watered the crops, etc. So they really believe what they're saying. The problem, I think, is that they may be believing what they're saying, but the Israelites, they don't know so much about that. Maybe so, maybe not. And they look around and say, well, gosh, if, we need all the blessing we can get going into this promised land. So consequently, let's just go ahead and include your God too, in addition to Jehovah, in addition to Yahweh. And so, one more little God, a little more salt on the steak to make it taste even better. And I think a lot of times that was their philosophy, especially for Israelites who may either didn't see the direct hand of God operate in their life during their lifetime, or let's just face it, they're like some Christians even today. They're church goers. They know this is what they should do. They go through the motions. They do it. But if it came down to the wire to lay down your life for what you believe, they wouldn't be having any of that. There are Christians like that today. And I'm sure
And that's part of our human nature too.
What, Dawn?
That's part of our human nature, to just give in to whatever is easy for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about them, we can probably see that we're not any different really than they are. But I was reading something the other day, and it proposed a question to me that I had to stop for a minute and really give it some serious thought. Am I, as a Christian, I say I believe in God and certainly do, but am I really trying to live out the Christian life? Or am I I'm a Christian, I know I got my fire insurance, and therefore I'm good, and I'm glad that I'm a Christian. And so as long as I'm not a bad person, then I should be okay in God's eyes as a Christian who's just not a bad person. Hey, Carl, good to join us. Glad to see you.
Couldn't get hooked up at the house.
Okay, well, we're glad you're at the church. Or either that or you've got a big living room. Okay, so Carl, we are in chapter 33.
I was so irritated I couldn't get hooked up. I left my sword. So
All right, that's okay. We're doing a summary of these books, chapters. So by this story, Moses reminds the Israelites of God's faithfulness to them through this 40 years of wandering in the desert. And God instructs Moses to charge Israel with their mission in Canaan. Israel was to first of all drive them out, then break down the high places and tear them down and destroy all the idols, because this ground now is, i.e., holy ground. It's where the one true God should be the God of everybody who lives in this land, because all of the people in this land now are either Hebrew Israelites, or they are, maybe there's some of the inhabitants that were left behind in Canaan that were not driven out. We know there were some like that. And what we're saying is, if they're going to stay, they need to be assimilated in to believe in the one true God. Carl, mute your microphone. You're getting static, I think, from your phone. Can you just mute your microphone if you're not talking? Okay. And so the idea here is God's given them a promised land. He's given them a place just for them. And if there are inhabitants from the native land after they possess it, then those people should be assimilated into worship of the one true God. And by that, usually they are assimilated into that through marriage. But sometimes they don't have a marital relationship with a Hebrew, but because they live in the land, and I want you to think about this, everybody, almost everybody in the promised land worships Yahweh. So what does that mean for the few people who still live there who were natives of that land? What if every church corner had a Baptist church, or every church was a Baptist church, or at least a Christian church, worshiped God and believed in Jesus Christ? In our nation, what would happen about the explosion of new converts if we all, number one, went to church, preached the gospel, and lived the gospel? I think we would see a revival in America in a matter of a couple of months. Here's our problem, or let me ask you, what do you think the problem is that we're not seeing such as that? Why are we not seeing revival in our land?
Because we can't get along long enough to get anything done.
All right, we can't get along long enough to get anything done. What else? Anybody else? Any ideas? Don?
Hey, I don't want to call it a lack of desire, but we don't witness in some positive ways when we can. And I think you said before, and I've read many times, some people only came to church because they were invited the first time. And so, there's got to be some of that that's affecting what it is we do each day, and how many people we talk to and contact.
Okay.
Lack of commitment.
Lack of commitment. Thank you, Susan. Let me tell you what I saw on I'm on Facebook a lot now. I never had been, but I am now, because the church's Facebook, and they keep posting videos on there, all of that kind of stuff. So of course, we have a church Facebook page, and I have a personal Facebook page that I go to now to see what other people are doing, people that have friended me and that kind of thing. And let me tell you what I see happen, what I see within the Christian community. And I will say that on Facebook, this is a minority that I see people doing this. But it really kind of concerns me when I see people that I know go to church somewhere, and then I see them on Facebook talking about all the worldly things that they do and are involved in. And now when I say worldly things, I'm not talking about, well, let's go out and feed the seagulls and sit on the beach. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about worldly things. How can I say this tactfully? Okay, let me skip the tack and just say it the way it is. When people are talking about the partying that they're doing and maybe going to the casinos or doing this activity or that activity or saying things or using language, and these are people who are in the churches, that bothers me. And I'm not talking about it bothers me as a pastor, it bothers me as a Christian, because I really believe that the reason we don't see revival in our land is because so many of us going to churches, we're in the church, our car's out there every Sunday, we're a witness to everybody who drives by and sees our automobile, but we are not living that Christian life outside the church. Does anybody agree or contest that idea? Okay, I see one hand. Is that an agreement? This is an agreement. Okay, this is I contest. I don't think that's happening. Well, oh, I even see a poster down here. Who is that? Oh, Mr. Brian's got an amen. Do you have these things made in advance, Brian?
Yes.
Okay. So we could have posters. Hallelujah. Give Brother Stan an amen. I want to see that poster sometime. Okay. So do y'all understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
Does that bother you?
Complacency bothers me.
What, Carl?
Lifestyle.
Complacency bothers me.
All right. Now my next question is, what can we do about it?
We need to get excited about it, because if we're excited, other people will want what we have.
Okay, can I make a parenthetical question? What gets us Christians excited?
Getting in the Word and learning what Christ has for us.
Okay. I'm thinking, I know some people that get into the Word and they read the Bible and they say, well, you know, I read it and it's a good history book. I'm not excited about it. I think, Marilyn, to add to what you said, for us to get excited about it, we have to see God move in our lives. And that gets us excited. For that to happen, we have to believe God, actually what he says in his word, and believe it and apply it to the circumstances in our lives and live like we believe what he said is true, instead of just being a churchgoer. So how else can we get excited? Reading the word, believing God, how else can we get excited and be zealous about our God and his relationship in our life, and ours with him?
I think we need to share it more.
Okay, tell people about him. How can we do that? Or let me ask another question. Why don't we do that? We need to share him more. Why don't we do it? What are some of the reasons that cause us not to share our faith more openly and more readily?
We don't want to be rejected.
Okay, that's a good point. We hate people telling us no. We hate people saying, I don't like you. I don't want to hear what you got to say. What other reasons? The one I'm thinking about comes back to what we first said going into this. Don, you got a comment?
Yeah, some people feel inadequate because they haven't gone into the Word, they haven't studied, and they haven't a clue what to say. And yet God told us, get into my word and I'll put those words in your mouth.
Do you think some people feel like, well, I don't want to talk to anybody about Jesus and how you should live, okay? Because I'm not living that way either. And I've had a lot of people tell me that, well, I don't talk to Jesus about, let me just throw this out here and use this one, about drinking alcohol. I'm not going to tell them that Jesus doesn't want you getting drunk because, well, I get drunk too. So I'm not going to mention that. I don't want to bring it up. Now, that's an extreme illustration, I know, but I really believe that for a lot of people, that's the issue. Brian?
I said, shame on you, Brother Stan.
Yeah, shame on me. Let me stop this recording and delete that part. All right. Okay, let's see where we can move on a little bit here. The reason that God is so serious about all of this and tearing down idols and all is that he knows just how quickly Israel could be led astray from following him if they don't expel from the land the foreign people who worship the foreign gods. All right, so that kind of wraps up 33. Let's look at 34. It's a little bit shorter. It begins, the Lord said to Moses, command the Israelites and say to them, when you enter Canaan, that land that will be allotted to you as an inheritance is to have these boundaries. And so I'm not going to read the boundaries, but we have a northern, southern, east, and west boundaries for the tribes. Okay, then it gets down to 13. Moses commanded the Israelites, assign this land by lot as an inheritance. And the Lord has ordered that it be given to the 9.5 tribes. 9.5 plus 2.5 on the other side of the river, right? These 2 half tribes have received their inheritance on the east side of the Jordan towards the sunrise. East is towards sunrise, good. In 16, the Lord said to Moses, these are the names of the men who are to assign the land for you as an inheritance. Eleazar the priest and Joshua son of Nun, and appoint one leader from each tribe to help assign the land. And here are their names. And I'm not going to read all those names. But why is this? Didn't we have tribal leaders already at this point in time? We already did. We had people leading each tribe, and we had leaders of tribes, leaders of thousands, and leaders of hundreds. It was broken down so that some people would be responsible for all of them, and then others within a clan or a tribe, you would have different. One guy can't do it all, right? That's the bottom line. And that's why I appreciate so much help at our church, because I can't do it all either.
Brother Stan, weren't the ones that died in the wilderness? The ones that had.
Some of those did. Some of those did die in the wilderness, but ultimately, as they die, they're going to get a replacement tribal leader. So they still have tribal leaders. But it's interesting here that Moses says to divide up the land, these are the men who are going to do it. So those particular men must have had some insight or wisdom from the Lord that was given to them special to be able to do that job. God commands Moses to prepare Israel in 2 ways. First of all, by setting up the boundaries, northern, southern, east, and west. And secondly, where'd my secondly go? And second, by appointing a new set of tribal chiefs. God first identified the new leaders over the entire nation. That's Eleazar the priest and Joshua son of Nun. And then he identifies leaders over the tribes. And all of that is listed in those verses. The people of Israel have fought a few battles during their time in the wilderness. You know, they ran into obstacles sometimes, and especially going in and coming out of the wilderness. But real warfare had not been experienced by them at all. Although they had to drive the Canaanites out of the promised land, God sets their eyes on the prize before them, not on the fighting. And I think this is interesting because I really believe that in Ephesians, we get a picture of this where God says, he says, run the race He says, set your eyes on the finished prize. Look at the prize. Don't look at the journey. Don't look at the training. Don't look at the race itself where you're about out of breath. You don't know if you can make it. Keep your eye on the prize. And he echoes this principle in Ephesians, where Paul opens his letter speaking not of our spiritual warfare, but of our inheritance that we've already obtained in Christ. We find that in Ephesians chapter 1, 11 through 14. Christ himself has won a decisive victory, the most decisive victory at all, for all of us at the cross. So Paul details neither the spiritual nature of our struggles nor the armor much until the very end of the letter. We must fight, but our victory in Christ, it has foregone a conclusion already. It's a done deal. So let's set our eyes then, not on the struggle, but on the prize that is set before us. And what, can I ask you, what is your prize that keeps you going as a Christian, that motivates you to keep going in hard times and even times like this? What motivates you personally? Okay.
Knowing that at the end of the tunnel is a bright light of Christ. I just know that he's going to make everything okay.
All right. Everything okay, like how, Don? In the world or in your life or what?
Well, maybe neither. But I know he's there, and I know I belong to him. I know where I'm going to end up. And I know that regardless of what kinds of troubles and tribulations he puts me through, he's the reason for it. And even though I don't like some of the circumstances I might be in today, I can look back over times in my life where I had such things. Oh, that's why you did that. And as we experience God more, we trust him more. As we experience him more, we trust him, etc. Beautiful circle.
Okay. Anybody else want to comment on that? All right. What I want to comment about that is what motivates me to keep going is the fact that, and I'm not talking about me as a pastor, preacher, teacher, anything like that. I'm talking about me as a Christian. What keeps me motivated and going, even when I'm tired, even when I feel like, well, nobody else is doing their share, even all those times, what keeps me going is what the Bible tells me about Jesus and how much he loves me unconditionally. No matter whether I measure up or don't measure up, my faith in him pleases him. And it's kind of like, let me give you an example of a parent and a child. Now, let's just go down to the elementary school. And let's just say you're a teacher in an elementary class, and here's this child. She's 6, 7 years old, and the parent sees how you treat that child like you love that child. What does that immediately do with that parent as far as their attitude towards you? Positive, right? When someone once said, what did they say now? I'm trying to think. It was about a child or a dog. They both kind of apply, but if you love me, then you got to love my dog, or if you love me, then you got to take my child for whoever he is. You can't separate things like that. And Jesus did that with us. He said, you know what? I love you even when you don't measure up. Even when you don't meet my standard, I love you. And I died for you, and I give you heaven. We get something a lot better than the promised land. We get heaven. Now, why does he feel that way, even though we don't measure up? What is it that compels Christ to take us and accept us, even though we're not perfect? What one thing is it?
Love.
Susan? You have to turn your mic on.
Go ahead.
The love he has for us, Brother
It's
Sam.
the unconditional love.
Unconditional.
Okay.
Unconditional.
Carl, were you going to say something?
That's what I said.
Oh, okay.
Love.
Love. All right. So it's that unconditional love. Now, let me ask this question. If Christ has unconditional love for you and accepts you because of your faith, that's it. What must I do to be saved? And he told the Philippian jailer, be good, obey all the laws, come to church. No, he said, believe. Believe. Faith, God. Believing. And that word we talk about, belief is a noun, but to believe is a verb. And it's an ongoing thing. It's not I believe in you, Jesus. Now I'm good and I'll just go about my life. When we believe in that Jesus is God's Son and we offer ourselves to him as a living sacrifice, listen, our entire life, every aspect of our life should change. So when I see people on Facebook talking about, we're members of so-and-so church and we had a fellowship dinner last week, and then I see a couple of posts down below that where they were all out drinking with their buddies, we're doing something else. I'm wondering, do you really believe, or do you just want enough of God to get the fire insurance? Maybe that's what some people want. But I want to say this, there's hope for those kind of people, because I dare say, I know I can say this about myself and maybe others, that we might have been like that at one time. We might have thought, I'm good enough. I go to church. I carry my kids to church. I read my Bible when I'm at church, at least. And, I'm a good person. I don't hurt anybody. And I love God. And therefore, that's all that's needed. But the Bible doesn't say that's all that's needed. It says there's much is required, because we have received much is required of us. And so consequently, I think there's going to be some kind of rude awakening one day at the marriage supper of the Lamb, that judgment of our works, when we receive our rewards now these are rewards, we're already in heaven, so this has nothing to do with getting to heaven or being saved. But when we are at the marriage supper of the Lamb and we receive rewards based on what we did in the body. Now, if nothing motivates you to live for Christ and to work and serve God, that ought to motivate you, because that means that when I stand before the Lord at the judgment seat of Christ, and my works, what I did in the body for Christ, are judged. Some of those things I did, they're going to burn up. They're wrong motive behind what I did. But other things are going to be like gold and silver, valuable, and I'm going to receive a reward for them because I did the right thing for the right motive. Motive is so important. Why we serve God, why we go on a mission trip, why we teach Sunday school. What's our motive? And I know everybody that does those things gets tired sometimes, but that doesn't mean your motive for doing them is bad. It just means we get weary sometimes. Okay, last chapter, and it's going to take just a couple of minutes, really short, I think. Did I get this? No, am I on the last chapter? 35? No, I'm not on the last chapter. Okay, so let's just see if we can sum them up. In chapter 35, we have a command to the Israelites to give the Levites towns to live in. And we call these towns, anybody know what we call them? Marilyn, I know you know. Dawn knows. Brian knows. Carl knows. Everybody probably knows. You've heard it before.
Cities of refuge.
Cities of refuge. Thank you. How many cities of refuge does it list here in this chapter? Okay, let me do multiple. Yes, 3 cities 6 cities or 12 cities? 6 cities. Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate that. Jeff's doing sign language. All right, so 6 cities, but there were 48 towns given to the Levites. 48, and 6 of them were cities of refuge. 3 of them were on the east side of the Jordan, and 3 of them were on the west side of the Jordan. Now, that's really interesting, but what is a city of refuge? What does that mean? What's it about?
City of refuge is where someone could come who was accused of a capital crime, and to keep from being killed, he had to go to that city and stay there until the person who was after him on a what do they call that, a blood oath or something, until he died, and then they could go their own way.
Okay, almost 100%. Almost 100%. You get an A-, Dawn. I picked that. The reason, yes, you're right. It's when someone killed someone, okay, whether it was accidental or what, there is a law in effect during this time. It's called the kinsman redeemer. We read about that in the book of Ruth also. But a kinsman redeemer was not only had permission to do this by law, but was required to do it, was required to avenge that the relationship who was killed, revenge his death by killing the other person. So we have set up cities of refuge. So let me give you a couple of scenarios. Here's Joe, and he lays in wait on the trail, waiting for somebody to come by and rob him. Bill comes by. He jumps out of the bushes, clubs Bill in the head and kills him, and runs off. But someone sees him, and so tells the next of kin who that person was, and the next of kin, by law, can go and take revenge on him and kill him. So the city of refuge was set up for that person who had done that murder, killed that person, to escape to and have refuge in until such time as that person was either adjudicated or convicted. I think I used that right word. So that's one scenario. The second one is if for instance, Charlie and I were lifting a 500-pound weight, trying to put it on top of the building, and my arms gave out and I fell and it crushed Charlie and killed him, then the kinsman redeemer has a right to come and kill me, take my life. So I would escape to a city of refuge. And then until I was pronounced by the priest to be innocent of murder. Yeah, it was my fault that Charlie got squished under that 500-pound thingy, but I didn't do it intentionally. It wasn't murder. It wasn't like lying in wait. Okay, so those are the 2 circumstances. Somebody could get to a city of refuge and be protected against the revenge of somebody else, a family member. Don, the only thing that you did say that was not quite right was that it was not until the kinsman died, it was until the priest died that was in that city of refuge. That's when they could leave at some time later. And I read that again today for about the 3rd time, and it kind of jumped off the page to me because I'm thinking, well, whenever somebody dies and wants to kill him, then he can come back out, but it's not. He has to stay there until the priest dies, and then he's released from the city of refuge. Okay, so that kind of talks about those cities and what they were for. Chapter 36. Here, this one is really a flashback on an earlier chapter. I'm trying to think what chapter it was. I thought I had it wrote down here. Chapter 27. Okay, so this 36 deals with the inheritance of Zelophehad's daughters. And it says here, the family heads of the clan of Gilead, son of Machir, the son of Manasseh, who were from the clans of the descendants of Joseph, came and spoke before Moses and the leaders, the heads of the Israelite families. And they said, verse 2, when the Lord commanded my Lord to give the land as an inheritance to the Israelites by lot, he ordered you to give the inheritance to our brother, son Zelophehad had to his daughters. So we remember this from back in Numbers chapter 27. And you remember where the daughters came up to Moses and he said, look, we're supposed to get part of the booty here, but the problem is it's supposed to go to the brothers, and our brothers have died, and our fathers died, and our uncles have died. We're the only ones left. And they said, well, you rightly should get the portion. So this is a reminder of that. And now here they come again with dividing up the land. So we see back then it was dividing up the booty, and now it's dividing up the land. So to resolve the issue, God offered a fairly simple solution. The daughters could marry whomever they wanted to, so long as the men were of the same clan. That way the inheritance would stay in the clan rather than passing to another one. But in the final chapters of the book here, we read multiple stories about preparations that Moses took with Israel to ready them for claiming their inheritance. And one of the other stipulations was that if one of the daughters who received the inheritance married an Israelite from another clan, when she died, that inheritance did not stay in the new clan. It reverted back to the original clan. And we're talking about property. So what that means is the smaller tribes would not ultimately, through intertribal marriages, get assimilated into a bigger tribe and ultimately disappear. So we will always have the 12 tribes of Israel based on this information. So when we had a smaller tribe and they lost part of their land, I'm doing on the map, they lost part of their land as an inheritance because she married into another tribe. When she died, that part of that land came back. Reminds you of the year of Jubilee, doesn't it? Where at the end of the 50th year, any lands that had been sold out of the clan, out of the tribe, came back so that the tribe would still be intact and still exist. So that kind of wraps up that chapter. It's not real detailed, nor is it very long, but it does complete what we read in chapter 27 of Numbers. Okay, so that kind of wraps up where we're at with that book of the Bible. Do you have any comments tonight or anything else you'd like to add or question?
Can I mention something?
Yes, Carl.
It reminds me of Boaz and Ruth. Boaz married Ruth so that Obed could receive the inheritance.
Yep, that's right. And if you haven't, there's two books in the Bible that we talk about sometimes. One is more popular than the other. The book of Ruth is a lot more popular than the book of Esther, but both of them have to do with Israel being redeemed back to God. Okay, does anybody else have a comment? Okay, well, it's really been great to be with you guys tonight.